So UFC 300 is only a couple of months away, and we're left without a main event so far. And Ariel Helwani has just dropped some news which kind of confirms my initial feeling and current feeling of the UFC had absolutely no plans for UFC 300 whatsoever, and are just kind of throwing shit at the wall and hoping that something's going to stick. Because this is the most recent news that we got from Ariel Helwani, kind of from what he understands and from what he knows. I've got this just via MMA Ideas on Instagram here. This is what we've got, for summarized by MMA Ideas. For UFC 300 main event, Ariel is not saying it's done, so just to be clear, Conor McGregor is not going to be part of the plan as of now, which is a big shame. And there's options being discussed. There's 4 of them. Leon versus Bilal as a last resort. Israel Adesanya versus Dricus du Plessis, which could happen. Khamzat versus Duplessis could happen as well. But then, if that doesn't work out, they could do Leon Edwards versus Khamzat Chimaev for the UFC 300 main event. So also, this kind of confirms quite a few things that I have stated in previous videos. I have said in previous videos that I believe that the UFC actually wanted the main events to be Leon Edwards versus Bilal Muhammad. But after they saw the backlash and the fact that the fans just don't want to see that as the UFC 300 main event, they've decided to try and go in a different direction. But that different direction, they had absolutely no plans for whatsoever. So now they're kind of throwing shit at the wall and hoping something sticks 2 months out from the biggest event in event history, in UFC history. So let's talk about what they've got going. Leon versus Bilal, I've already talked about before in a couple of videos. Israel Adesanya versus Dricus du Plessis, I have talked about that in a previous video as well, kind of speculating what we could see. Khamzat versus Dricus du Plessis is kind of something that crossed my mind, but not something I really thought about, since he did have, I believe it was like a blood disease or some sort of really serious disease that he was showing on, like, him in the hospital, and his veins were all red and it looked kind of bad. So I didn't know if he was going to be able to come back for 300. So it seems like it's going to be Khamzat versus Dricus du Plessis for the 185-pound title. Otherwise, they might try and do Leon versus Khamzat at 170. I would assume that's what it's at for the welterweight title. But if Khamzat misses weight, I'm pretty sure they'll probably pay Bilal Muhammad to be a backup in case Khamzat misses weight. Then it will be Bilal versus Leon. What I really want to see happen, honestly, this is my number one most ideal situation to kind of see, would be Leon Edwards versus Bilal Muhammad co-main event, main event, Khamzat versus du Plessis, or Israel Adesanya versus du Plessis. It is interesting to know that the UFC has no plans whatsoever to involve Sean Strickland in that main event plan, because I think they probably could maybe build the card around Strickland versus du Plessis, but maybe they don't want Strickland being the main event, because especially with the antics that he's been getting up to recently, I think the UFC is probably quite happy that Strickland is not the champion anymore. But you go to the card, and one thing I will say is, when Dana White announced Zhang Weili versus Yan Xiaonan, he said he had 2 more title fights to announce. We're only apparently going to get 1. So it seems like something's fallen out. It seems like plans have changed. It seems like they've royally fucked something up, to be honest. I don't know what's going on with UFC 300. It seems like an absolute shit show to me, if you ask me, to be honest with you. And to even add to that again, like, when they initially announced the card, they announced 3 prelims. Calvin Kattar versus Sterling. They announced, I mean, Prohaska versus Rakic won't be on the main card. Surely not. And then they also announced Bonacol versus Cody Brundage. They were the 3 fights they announced the UFC 300 card for. Like, what did they expect, man? Like, this card, I know everyone's saying this card is so stacked, because it is. It's a really good card. I'm really excited for it. But it's not the card that we were promised. It's not the card that Dana White is still trying to hype us up with. He's saying that if he can manage to pull off what he's going to pull off, they're going to make a documentary about it or something like that. It's like, no, they won't, Dana. There's nothing you can do right now that is worth making a documentary. If you manage to put together Khamzat Chimaev versus Dricus du Plessis, I'll be honest, I honestly wouldn't really get, like, too crazy about it. I wouldn't be like, oh my goodness, we need a documentary. If you manage to do Conor McGregor versus Michael Chandler UFC 300 main event, I'd probably get quite excited. But TDP versus Khamzat's a massive fight, don't get me wrong. And it is a UFC 300 main event. I don't want to kind of come across that that's not a big fight, because it is. I just want to see the co-main event be Edwards versus Bilal as well. And one thing that has been obvious to me, and this is one thing that I don't understand, that people don't understand, that I'm saying, is I don't understand why the UFC didn't plan this event months ago. Because people are saying you can't plan an event 6 months out. You know, fighters only train in camps for 2 to 3 months. I know that. I'm not stupid. But like, could they not have just at least had like a list of fights that they think would have been perfect for 300, and then just try and work out matchups in time, kind of to work around what they wanted for 300? Because to me, it seemed like they had absolutely no plan whatsoever, and just tried to slap this together. I would say this is probably a more poorly organized card than UFC 299. It feels like they had a plan for 299. 299 is a good card. And then with 300, I feel like they've just kind of slapped a bunch of fights together that they know that the fans are going to like, but without a main event. Like, this is a banger card. You know what I mean? It feels like they planned for this. They've got Despain making his debut on that card. They've got some bangers on the prelims. They've got some big names. You know, you got Almeida versus Blades, which is going to be big. Asu Almabayev, a big upcoming prospect. Probably not a big enough fight to put on 300, to be fair, but it feels like they planned this card. You know what I mean? They had intentions for this card, and they went through and they got it done. 300, I feel like they had no plan whatsoever, and this is what we're left with. And this is what we're potentially going to get. Your plans, Izzy versus Duplessis, Khamzat versus Duplessis, Leon versus Khamzat, Leon versus Bilal, and Dana's out here trying to say that he's cooking behind the scenes. He's just cooking this. Like, you know, like he's saying that he's going to need a documentary. It's almost like he's trying to convince Khabib to come back. You know what I mean? Like, what are you doing? It's just overhyped nonsense, man. I just can't. It's just overhyped nonsense, man. Like, I feel like if they didn't focus on Power Slap and actually focused on UFC 300, would be getting a much better product. But they're just throwing shit at the wall, hoping something sticks. And to be fair, it has stuck. This is a good card. But it's not the card we were promised. It's not you'll look at the first prelim of the night and you won't believe it's the first prelim of the night. Andrade versus Rodriguez, I could see that being the first prelim of the night. I could see Nicole versus Brundage being the first prelim of the night. I mean, Green versus Miller has to be on there, you know, but that could be the first prelim of the night of a UFC 299 card. I wouldn't be surprised, honestly. Just nonsense. It's just nonsense, honestly, if you ask me. It's just a fucking shit card. Anyway, it's actually a good card, but whatever. It's not what we were promised.